Rosemary collapsed on a Tuesday morning while watering her geraniums. By Friday, she was gone. By Sunday, I found the shoebox she had hidden behind my championship trophies. Inside was a key, a hard drive, and a letter that began with 5 words that destroyed my world. Brendan is stealing from them. Them. 25 men who still called me Coach. 25 families my son had gutted while shaking their hands at our Thanksgiving table. She knew. She fought alone. Now, it was my turn. But let me take you back to that Tuesday, because everything that followed, the betrayal, the war, the sacrifice, it all started with the scent of wet soil and the soft thud of a watering can hitting the brick patio of our Evanston home. I heard it from the kitchen. Not the fall itself, but the silence that followed. Rosemary was never silent. In 38 years of marriage, that woman filled every room with humming, with the clatter of dishes, with opinions delivered at full volume about the Bears' offensive line or the neighbors' neglected hedges. Silence from Rosemary was louder than any scream. I found her face down in the geraniums, the red petals crushed beneath her cheek like a grotesque blush. The watering can still gurgled beside her, its stream darkening the January soil in a pattern that looked almost deliberate, like a signature being written by a ghost. I dropped to my knees, the frozen brick biting through my pajama pants, and turned her over. Her eyes were open but somewhere else entirely. The ambulance came in 7 minutes. I counted every second by the rhythm of my own heartbeat against the cold ground. She never woke up. 3 days of machines breathing for her, while I held a hand that grew colder by the hour. 3 days of Brendan pacing the hospital corridor in his tailored Navy suit, checking his phone with a frequency that should have told me everything but told me nothing at the time. On Friday morning, at 6:14, the line on the monitor went flat, and the only woman who ever made me feel like more than a whistle and a clipboard took her last breath while I was staring at a vending machine across the hall, trying to decide between black coffee and chamomile tea. How do you choose between coffee and tea while your wife dies 12 feet away? You don't choose. The universe chooses for you, and you spend the rest of your life wondering if chamomile would have tasted different than regret. The funeral was 4 days later. January in Evanston is a specific kind of cruelty. The wind comes off Lake Michigan like it has a personal vendetta against anyone foolish enough to stand still, and we stood very still at Rose Hill Cemetery, while the minister said words I could not hear over the roaring in my own skull. I watched the dark wood of her casket lower into ground so frozen the gravediggers had needed a jackhammer to break through. Brendan stood beside me, his arm around my shoulder in a gesture that felt rehearsed. I noticed his left hand. It wasn't trembling with grief. It was angled toward his chest, his thumb scrolling on his phone screen with a practiced subtlety. I caught a flash of green numbers, a financial chart, before he slid the device back into his pocket. He caught me looking and produced a tissue, dabbing at eyes that seemed perfectly dry beneath the performance. Sophia, my granddaughter, 11 years old with her grandmother's inquisitive brown eyes, stood at the edge of the grave, clutching a stuffed bear that Rosemary had given her on her last birthday. She didn't cry. She just stared at the hole in the earth with a concentration that seemed far too old for her face, as if she was trying to memorize the shape of absence. "Is Grandma coming back when it gets warm, Grandpa?" she whispered, her breath a tiny white ghost in the frozen air. I couldn't answer. I just pulled her close, feeling the cold synthetic fur of the bear press against my coat. There was a man at the funeral I didn't recognize. Tall, heavy-set, wearing a black overcoat that looked too expensive for a cemetery in January. He stood at the far edge of the gathering, never approaching the casket, never signing the guest book, but I saw him exchange a glance with Brendan. A nod. Brief. Professional. The kind of nod that belongs in a boardroom, not beside a grave. I filed it away in the back of my mind, the way a coach files away an opponent's tell. I didn't know yet that I was already in the game. The days after the funeral moved like cold syrup. Visitors came and went, bringing casseroles and sympathy that tasted equally bland. Brendan was everywhere. The will, the bank accounts, the insurance, He moved through our home with an efficiency that felt less like grief and more like inventory. I caught him in Rosemary's study twice, once with her file cabinet open and once with her laptop powered on. "Just organizing things for you, Dad," he said, his smile warm and wide and absolutely empty. It was Sunday morning, 3 days after we put her in the ground, when I finally entered the trophy room. I hadn't been able to face it. The room was Rosemary's gift to me on my 60th birthday, a converted den lined with 38 years of championship plaques, team photographs, and the 3 state trophies that sat on the top shelf like golden sentinels of a life well coached. I went in to find my 1998 championship ring. I wanted to hold something that reminded me of a time when winning was simple, and the enemy wore a different jersey. Not your own last name. I reached for the ring box on the top shelf, my fingers brushing past the tallest trophy, the one from the '98 state finals, our greatest season. And that's when I felt it. Behind the trophy base, wedged against the wall, my fingertips grazed something that didn't belong. A box. Rectangular. Light, but not empty. I pulled it free. It was a Nike shoebox. The old kind with the orange lid. From a model they stopped making in 2004, the tape sealing it shut was yellowed with age, but across the top, in Rosemary's unmistakable handwriting, a single word had been written in thick black marker. Frank. My name. In her hand. Hidden behind my greatest victory, I stood there in the dim trophy room, holding that box like it might detonate, and felt the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. The tape peeled away with a dry, crackling sound that seemed to echo in the silence of a house that was learning how to be empty. I lifted the orange lid, and the smell hit me first. Old paper and the faint ghost of Rosemary's hand lotion, lavender, and something clinical beneath it. Inside were 3 objects arranged with the deliberate care of a woman who had planned this moment down to the placement of each item. A portable hard drive, small and black, cold to the touch. A brass key, heavy and unmarked, attached to a plain steel ring, and a letter, handwritten on the cream stationery I had given her for our 30th anniversary, folded once and sealed with a piece of clear tape. I reached for the letter. My hands were steady. A coach's hands are always steady, but when I unfolded the page and read the first 5 words, my knees buckled, and I sat down hard on the carpet, the box spilling its secrets across the floor. Brendan is stealing from them. Them. The word sat in the center of my chest, like a stone dropped into still water. I read the letter 3 times before the words stopped swimming across the page, my eyes tracking Rosemary's elegant cursive with the desperate focus of a man trying to read a map in a burning building. Frank, if you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry that I left you with this burden, instead of a quiet retirement and the garden we planned. But silence would have made me complicit, and I refuse to leave this world carrying his sins on my conscience. Brendan has been systematically stealing from the people who trust our family. He has used your name, your reputation, your legacy as a coach to gain access to the retirement funds, college savings, and life insurance policies of men who still call you coach. Men who shook your hand at every reunion and trusted your son because he carried your last name. I have spent 2 years documenting everything. The hard drive contains recordings, financial records, emails, and bank statements that prove a pattern of fraud totaling over $4 million. 25 victims, Frank. 25 families. Most of them were your players. The brass key opens apartment 4B at 614 Clark Street. I rented it under my maiden name, Rose Malone. No one knows it exists. Go there. Alone. Tell no one. Especially not Brendan. He has hired someone to watch us. There is a man named Marcus Rivera. You remember him. Number 11, point guard. 2005 through 2009. He is now a criminal attorney at Cook County. Rosemary had underlined his name twice. He is the one who can help you fight. I could not go to him myself without risking everything. But I made sure he would be ready when you came. I know what you are feeling right now. I know because I felt it every single day for 730 days while you slept soundly in the next room. The rage, the disbelief, the nauseating certainty that the boy we raised has become something neither of us can recognize. Do not let the rage make you reckless. Do not let the love make you weak. Be the man I married. Be the coach who never lost a fourth quarter. I love you. Finish what I could not. Forever, Rosemary. I sat on the trophy room floor until the light through the window shifted from gray morning to pale afternoon. The letter rested on my knees, growing warm from my body heat, as if Rosemary herself was pressing her palm against the paper from the other side. The hard drive and the brass key sat beside me on the carpet, two objects that weighed less than a basketball but carried the gravity of an entire collapsed universe. 25. She had written the number so precisely, so deliberately. I tried to do the math in my head, tried to calculate how many post-game handshakes that represented, how many graduation ceremonies and wedding invitations and Christmas cards signed with the words, "Thank you, Coach," and then I tried to imagine each of those hands being emptied by my own son, and the taste of bile rose so sharply in my throat that I had to grip the carpet to keep from vomiting. Have you ever had the ground beneath your life simply disappear? Not crack, not shift, but vanish entirely, as if it was never solid in the first place? That is what those 5 words did to me. They didn't change my past. They revealed that my past had never been what I thought it was. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in our bed, in the dark, smelling Rosemary's pillow, the lavender fading already beneath the cold sterile. Nothing of an empty house. Every sound became amplified. The furnace clicking on, the refrigerator humming, the creak of the floorboards settling in the January freeze. And beneath it all, the new sound, the one I would carry for months. The low, constant roar of a fury so deep it felt geological, like something shifting beneath the earth's crust. At 4:30 in the morning I made my decision. I rose in the dark, dressed in silence, and moved through the house with the careful deliberation of a man who knows he is being watched. Rosemary's warning echoed in my skull. Be careful with the back mirrors. He has hired someone. I checked every window. The street was dark and empty, the snow falling in slow, fat flakes that muffled the world into stillness. I took the hard drive. I took the key. I left the letter hidden inside the trophy base, wedging it into the hollow space beneath the golden figure with its arms raised in eternal victory. If someone searched the house, they would find an empty shoebox and nothing more. At 5:15, I backed the old Subaru out of the garage with my headlights off, rolling down the driveway on momentum alone before starting the engine at the curb. The cold bit through my coat immediately. The kind of January cold that feels personal, like the weather has read your file and knows exactly where you are weakest. I drove west on Central Street, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every 6 seconds. A coach's habit. Check the clock. Check the score. Check the defense. Clark Street was a narrow residential block on the western edge of Evanston, lined with low-rise apartment buildings that had seen better decades. The kind of street where no one remembers your face because everyone is too busy surviving their own quiet emergencies. 614 was a brown brick 3-story, with a faded green awning and a front door that buzzed open without requiring an intercom code. Rosemary had chosen well. Anonymous. Forgettable. The perfect hiding place for a secret that could incinerate a family. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, the treads groaning beneath my weight, the stairwell smelling of old cooking oil and industrial cleaner. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hall, a plain brown door with a brass number that matched the brass key warming in my clenched fist. I stood there for a long moment. The hallway was silent, except for the muffled sound of a television bleeding through a neighbor's wall and the rhythmic drip of a leaking pipe somewhere above me. My hand trembled as I raised the key toward the lock. Not from cold, not from age. From the absolute certainty that whatever waited behind this door would divide my life into 2 halves, before and after, with no bridge between them. Is there a word for the grief you feel for someone who is still alive? For the death of a son who still breathes, still smiles, still calls you Dad. If there is, I didn't know it yet. But I was about to learn it, letter by letter, written in Rosemary's steady hand across the walls of apartment 4B. I slid the key home. The lock turned with a smooth click that sounded like the hammer of a gun being cocked. I pushed the door open, and the smell of stale coffee and old paper rushed out to meet me like the breath of a tomb. I stepped inside and the door swung shut behind me with a soft, pneumatic sigh, as if the apartment itself had been holding its breath for months, waiting for someone to finally enter. The space was small, barely 400 square feet. A studio with a kitchenette tucked into one corner and a single window facing the alley below. But it wasn't the size that stopped me in my tracks. It was the walls. Every surface, every inch of drywall from the baseboard to the ceiling trim was covered. Photographs, printouts, bank statements, handwritten notes on yellow legal pads, and connecting them all, a web of red thread pinned between thumbtacks, crisscrossing the room like the nervous system of something monstrous laid bare. The red threads converged on a single photograph pinned at the center of the largest wall. My son, Brendan's face, captured from a distance in what looked like a restaurant parking lot, his expression mid-laugh. His hand on the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize. Around his photograph, radiating outward like spokes on a wheel of ruin, were 25 names written on index cards in Rosemary's meticulous block print. I knew those names. Every single one. They weren't strangers or abstract victims in a police report. They were my boys: Jerome Thompson, Danny Whitmore, Carlos Medina, Terrence Okafor, Billy Park. Names that used to echo off gymnasium walls during layup drills and free throw practice. Names I had shouted through cupped hands across polished hardwood floors for 38 years. Names attached to faces that lit up every time they walked into my house for the annual team barbecue, shaking my hand, slapping my back, telling their own sons about the time Coach Callahan made them run suicides until they learned what discipline meant. Beneath each name was a number. A dollar amount written in red marker, circled twice. 180,000, 200, 10,000, 95,000, 160,000. The numbers blurred together into a single screaming chorus of theft that made the small apartment feel like it was tilting on its axis. I moved closer to the wall, my breath shallow, my fingertips tracing the red thread from Brendan's photograph to the first cluster of names. The thread led through a series of documents pinned in sequence. A brochure for something called Lakeshore Legacy Investments, a contract template with Brendan's firm letterhead. A photograph of a seminar room filled with familiar faces, all of them looking at a projector screen that displayed a graph climbing steadily upward toward a future that would never arrive. On the small desk beneath the window sat a tablet computer, its screen dark, positioned beside a cold mug of coffee with a skin of mold floating on its surface and a stack of yellow legal pads filled with Rosemary's handwriting. The coffee told me everything about the timeline. She had been here weeks ago, maybe days, working until the very edge of her own body's collapse. The mold was a calendar, a measure of exactly how long my wife had been gone from this room. Unable to return, unable to finish. I picked up the tablet and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, its blue glow harsh against the gray morning light filtering through the single window. A video file sat in the center of the home screen, labeled simply, "For Frank. First." I tapped it with a thumb that felt like it belonged to someone else. Rosemary appeared on the screen. She was sitting at this very desk, in this very room, the web of red thread visible behind her like a battlefield map. She was thinner than I remembered, her cheekbones sharper, but her eyes burned with a clarity that I now understood had nothing to do with acceptance of death and everything to do with the urgency of an unfinished mission. Frank. Her voice was steady, warm, and absolutely devastating in its familiarity. If you're watching this, it means my body gave out before my work was done. I'm sorry, my love. I wanted to hand you a finished case, not a puzzle. But time wasn't something I could negotiate. She paused, tucking a strand of silver hair behind her ear in that gesture I had seen 10,000 times across kitchen tables and restaurant booths and hospital bedsides. My throat closed. What you see on these walls is 2 years of documentation. Brendan has been running a fraudulent investment scheme, targeting retired individuals with moderate savings. His preferred victims are people with a personal connection to you. He uses your name, Frank. He uses your reputation. He tells them that Coach Callahan's son would never steer them wrong, and they believe him because they love you. She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes locked onto the lens with an intensity that made me feel like she could see me through time itself. He's not just stealing their money, Frank. He's stealing your legacy. Every boy who ever trusted a Callahan is being eaten alive by our son. And the worst part is he knows exactly what he's doing. This isn't desperation or addiction. It's architecture. He built this machine deliberately. How does a mother watch her own child become a predator? How does she document his crimes with the same steady hand she once used to braid his hair and pack his school lunches? I stared at Rosemary's face on the screen and saw the answer. She didn't do it as a mother. She did it as a witness. She separated the boy from the beast and aimed her weapon at the beast alone. The video continued for 12 more minutes. She walked me through the organization of the wall, the filing system in the desk drawers, the backup copies stored on the hard drive I already carried in my coat pocket. She explained that she had rented this apartment in cash under her maiden name, that she paid month to month, that no digital record connected it to the Callahan family. Then her voice dropped lower, and the warmth drained out of it, replaced by something cold and careful. There's something else you need to know. He knows someone has been watching. 6 weeks ago, a man started following me. Black Dodge Charger, Illinois plates. I don't know his name, but Brendan hired him. I was careful, Frank, but I may not have been careful enough. Be aware of your surroundings. Check your mirrors. And whatever you do, take the hard drive first. Everything else in this apartment is a decoy. If they find this place and destroy it, the only thing that matters is already in your hands. The video ended. The screen went dark, and I was left staring at my own reflection in the glass. A 72-year-old man standing in a dead woman's war room, holding a weapon he didn't yet know how to fire. I turned back to the window, pulling the thin curtain aside with 2 fingers. The alley below was gray and wet, lined with dumpsters and the back entrances of small businesses not yet open for the day. My eyes scanned the parked cars along the curb. Most were snow-covered, clearly untouched for days. But one was clean, a black Dodge Charger, parked 30 yards down the alley, its engine off but its windshield free of snow, the driver's seat slightly reclined, as if someone had been sitting there long enough to get comfortable. My stomach turned to ice. Rosemary's warning pulsed in my skull like a siren. Be careful with the back mirrors. They were already here. I forced myself away from the window. The Charger sat in my peripheral vision like a held breath. But I couldn't afford to let fear override purpose. Rosemary had given me a mission, and the clock on it had started ticking the moment I opened that shoebox. I turned back to the wall. The first name. The one circled in red marker so thick it had bled through the index card and stained the drywall beneath. Jerome Thomas Thompson. Below the name, in smaller print, number 20. 3. Captain. 1994 state champions. Below that, in red, $180,000. J.T. Thompson. My God. I could see him clear as yesterday. 17 years old, 6'3", arms like pistons, with a fadeaway jump shot so smooth, it looked like the ball was apologizing for leaving his fingers. The kid who carried our team through 3 overtimes in the state semifinal, who stood on my shoulders in the locker room while the rest of the boys doused us both in Gatorade, who wept at the senior banquet when he told the room I was the father his own dad never bothered to be. That kid. That boy who shook my hand at every reunion for the past 30 years and introduced his own children to me with the words, This is Coach Callahan. He's the reason I'm standing here. Brendan had gutted him for $180,000. I pulled a manila folder from the desk drawer labeled Thompson, J 1994. The folder was thick, held together with a rubber band that snapped as I stretched it off, the dry sound cracking in the silent apartment like a small bone breaking. Inside was a timeline, meticulously assembled in Rosemary's handwriting, with photocopies of documents arranged in chronological order. It started 18 months ago. Brendan had reached out to JT through their shared alumni network, suggesting coffee to discuss an incredible opportunity for members of the Callahan family. The language was deliberate. Not clients, not investors, family. He had learned that word was a skeleton key that opened every door my name had ever touched. The next page was a copy of a brochure for Lakeshore Legacy Investments, the same one I had seen pinned to the wall. It promised 8% annual returns on retirement portfolio allocations, backed by what it described as community-anchored real estate development in the greater Chicagoland area. The language was dense, professional, designed to inspire confidence while obscuring the complete absence of any actual investment vehicle beneath the glossy surface. Attached to the brochure was a printed email from Brendan to a man named Victor Hale. I didn't recognize the name, but Rosemary had circled it in red and written beside it, developer, partner, co-conspirator. The email was dated 14 months ago, and its contents made my vision narrow to a dark tunnel. Victor, the Thompson file is locked. He signed everything without reading past the first page. These guys are gold. My dad coached them. They'd sign over their kidneys if a Callahan asked. I'm moving to Whitmore next week. Same playbook. Set up the initial meeting at the Italian place on Dempster. Make sure the wine is the good stuff. Danny likes to feel important. Below that, a second email, sent the same day. One more thing. Start calling them Coach's boys in the paperwork. Builds brand consistency. These loyal puppies won't question a thing as long as they think Dad's name is on the door. Loyal puppies. I set the paper down because my hands had begun to shake with a violence I hadn't felt since the night a drunk driver nearly killed one of my players outside a post-game celebration in 1989. That night, I had channeled the fury into CPR compressions until the ambulance arrived. Now, there was nothing to compress. No chest to press against. Only paper and the echo of my son's contempt ringing off the walls of his mother's war room. Does a predator see itself in the mirror? Or does it only see the efficiency of its own design, admiring the sharpness of its teeth without ever counting the bodies they've torn through? I flipped to the final pages of JT's file. The contract itself was a masterwork of obfuscation. 32 pages of legal terminology designed to exhaust rather than inform. But clipped to the signature page was the detail that broke something fundamental inside me. The cosigner line. A guarantor signature. Written in a hand that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. But not quite. I stared at my own name. Forged in ink that was slightly too dark, with a pressure on the downstroke of the G that I never used. Brendan had practiced my signature. He had studied the way I signed birthday cards and insurance forms and report cards, and he had replicated it well enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking for the fake. And why would they look? Why would J.D. Thompson, who had watched me sign his scholarship recommendation letter in 1994, question a signature from the same hand on a document presented by the same man's son? He didn't just steal their money. He stole my hand. He lifted my signature off the page of our family life and pressed it into the service of a machine that devoured the people I loved most. I was still holding the contract, my forged name staring up at me like an accusation, when my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. The sound was aggressive in the silence, a mechanical intrusion that made my pulse spike. I pulled it out and read the notification on the lock screen. A text from Brendan. Sent at 6:47 in the morning. Dad, I noticed you weren't home this morning. Everything okay? Just worried about you being out alone in this cold. Let me come pick you up. Where are you? The words were warm, caring. The perfect imitation of a devoted son checking on his grieving father. But I could hear the machinery beneath them now, the gears of surveillance turning, the calculation behind every syllable. He wasn't asking where I was out of concern. He was asking because he needed to know. Because somewhere in the network of eyes and ears he had constructed, someone had reported that the old man's Subaru was not in the driveway at 6 in the morning. I looked at the Charger through the window again. Still there. Still clean. Still watching. I typed back with steady fingers. A coach's fingers. The fingers of a man who had spent 4 decades keeping his composure when the game was on the line and the scoreboard was not in his favor. Couldn't sleep. Went for a drive. Getting coffee. Home soon. I hit send and slid the phone back into my pocket. Then I looked at the wall one more time. At the 24 names I hadn't yet read. At the threads still waiting to be followed. And I made myself a promise that tasted like iron and smelled like cold January air. I would read every single file. I would learn the full architecture of what my son had built, and then I would tear it down, brick by brick, name by name, even if it meant demolishing the house I had spent 44 years building with my own heart. I spent the next 9 hours in that apartment reading the systematic dismantling of 25 lives. I didn't eat. I didn't move from the small desk chair except to use the bathroom once, and even then I brought a folder with me, unable to stop the momentum of Rosemary's meticulous documentation pulling me forward through layer after layer of calculated destruction. Danny Whitmore. Number 7. Shooting guard. Class of 1997. $195,000. Danny had refinanced his home to invest in what Brendan called a guaranteed municipal bond fund. There was no fund. The money went to an account in the Cayman Islands within 72 hours of the wire transfer. Danny's wife, Karen, had called Brendan 6 months later, asking about their returns. Rosemary had obtained a recording of that call. Brendan's voice was honey and patience, assuring Karen that the municipal market was cyclical and that their investment was performing beautifully beneath the surface. He told her to enjoy their grandchildren and stop worrying. Carlos Medina. Number 15. Power forward. Class of 2001. $210,000. His entire disability settlement, from a construction accident that left him with a shattered hip. Carlos couldn't work anymore. That money was his floor, the only thing between his family and freefall. Brendan had driven to his house personally, bringing a bottle of wine and a photograph of our 2001 team, and sat at Carlos's kitchen table for 3 hours, never once mentioning risk, never once revealing that the commercial property portfolio was nothing more than a mailbox in Delaware. Terrence Okafor, Billy Park, Samuel Rhodes, Andre Washington, Michael Kowalski. The names kept coming, each folder a fresh wound, each dollar amount. A new crater in the landscape of trust my family had spent decades building. Some lost $50,000. Some lost $300,000. The amounts varied, but the method was identical. Brendan would initiate contact through the alumni network. He would invoke my name within the first 5 minutes of conversation. He would present glossy materials for an investment vehicle that did not exist. And he would close with the same phrase every time, documented across 7 different witness statements Rosemary had quietly gathered. My father trusts me with his own retirement. Your family. That sentence was his key. His lockpick. His weapon of mass destruction dressed up in a cardigan and a family photograph. And the worst part, the detail that made me grip the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white, was that it was true. I had trusted him with my retirement. I had signed a power of attorney 3 years ago during my hip replacement surgery. A routine precaution that Rosemary had questioned at the time, and I had dismissed with a wave of my hand. He's our son. Rose. Who else would I trust? By 4 in the afternoon I had tallied the total. $4,200,000. 25 families. 30 years of built trust converted into liquid cash and funneled through a series of shell accounts that Rosemary had traced with the patience of a woman solving a jigsaw puzzle in the dark. But it was the final folder, The one Rosemary had labeled in red ink with a single word. Frank. That turned my blood to something colder than the January air outside. Inside was a printout of a property deed. My property deed. The house on Maple Avenue where I had lived for 40 years, where I had measured Brendan's height on the kitchen doorframe every birthday until he left for college, where Rosemary had planted her geraniums and argued with me about paint colors and slow danced in the living room on New Year's Eve. Attached to the deed was a forged power of attorney document dated during my hip surgery 3 years ago, granting Brendan full control over the property. He had used my time under anesthesia to fabricate a document giving himself ownership rights to my home. Beneath the deed was a sale agreement, unsigned but fully prepared, listing a closing date of March 15th. 6 weeks from today, my son was planning to sell my house out from under me while I was still grieving his mother. And beneath that, the final piece. A photocopy of medical records. My medical records. Except they had been altered. Notes had been added in a hand that wasn't my doctor's, suggesting early onset cognitive decline, memory lapses, and confusion consistent with the beginning stages of dementia. Rosemary's note in the margin was 3 words long. He's building a case. I understood then. The house wasn't just a theft. It was a burial. Brendan was constructing a legal framework to declare me mentally incompetent, seize control of my assets, sell the property, and deposit me in a facility where my voice would carry no legal weight. He wasn't waiting for me to die. He was planning to erase me while I was still breathing. Have you ever looked at a chessboard and realized you're 3 moves from checkmate? And the hand moving the pieces against you belongs to someone you taught how to play? That's what it felt like. Sitting in Rosemary's war room at 4:30 in the afternoon, holding a forged medical record with my son's fingerprints all over its margins. March 15th. 6 weeks. That was my clock. That was the timer on the bomb he had planted beneath the only home I had ever known. I gathered the most critical documents, slid them into a manila envelope, and tucked it inside my coat beside the hard drive. I checked the window one final time. The charger was gone. Either the driver had left for a break, or he had followed me here, and already reported back. Either way, I couldn't stay any longer. I locked the apartment behind me and descended the stairs on legs that felt carved from something heavier than bone. The drive home was a blur of gray slush and the persistent roar of the heater struggling against the cold that had taken up residence inside my chest. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the winter sun had already dropped behind the roofline, casting the house in the blue-gray light of early evening. I had barely hung my coat in the hallway when I heard it. The crunch of tires on frozen gravel. The slam of a car door, decisive and heavy. Footsteps on the porch, quick and purposeful. Then, a key in the back door. Not a knock. A key. Brendan stepped into the kitchen carrying a manila folder of his own, his coat still dusted with snow from the parking lot of wherever he had been manufacturing his concern. He smiled at me. That wide, warm smile that used to make parent-teacher conferences easier and uncomfortable truths disappear. Hey, Dad. You look exhausted. Sit down. I brought some papers we need to go through. Just routine stuff for Mom's estate. He set the folder on the kitchen island and slid it toward me like a dealer pushing cards across felt. It'll only take a minute. Just a couple of signatures. I looked at the folder. I looked at my son. And for the first time in 44 years, I saw him clearly. Not the boy I coached in the backyard. Not the young man who graduated summa cum laude. Not the son who toasted me at my retirement dinner with tears in his eyes and a speech about legacy. I saw the machine. I saw the architect of 25 demolished lives standing in my kitchen asking me to sign my own eviction notice with a smile. I didn't sit down. A coach learns early that height is authority. And I wasn't about to surrender the only advantage I had in my own kitchen. I leaned against the counter, my arms crossed, the granite edge pressing into the small of my back like a cold reminder to hold my ground. What kind of papers, Brendan? I kept my voice flat, tired. The voice of a man who had spent the day watching daytime television and missing his wife. not the voice of a man who had spent 9 hours reading the financial autopsy of his son's soul. He spread the folder open with long, manicured fingers. The documents inside were crisp, freshly printed, smelling of toner and the particular chemical sweetness of expensive legal stationery. "It's just an updated beneficiary form for Mom's life insurance," he said, tapping a yellow sticky arrow marking the signature line, "and a small adjustment to the estate trust. Standard stuff. Gerald says we need it processed before the end of the month to avoid tax complications." Gerald. His attorney. A name I now recognized from Rosemary's files as the man who had notarized at least 3 of the forged documents in the Thompson folder. Every word out of Brendan's mouth was a link in a chain designed to drag me underwater. And he delivered each one with the casual warmth of a man offering his father a cup of tea. "I'm too tired tonight, son." I rubbed my eyes with a deliberate slowness, performing exhaustion that wasn't entirely false. "Leave them on the counter. I'll look at them in the morning when my head's clearer." Something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker, quick as a card being palmed. The warmth didn't leave his face, but it rearranged itself into something with sharper edges. He leaned forward, both palms flat on the kitchen island, his cologne reaching me across the granite, expensive and cold, like the smell of a hotel lobby that has never been anyone's home. "Dad, I really think we should do this now. The deadline is tight. And honestly," he paused, tilting his head with a practiced concern that I now recognized as a weapon. "I've been worried about you. You've been forgetting things, small things. Leaving the stove on, misplacing your keys. Mom noticed it too, before she passed. She mentioned it to me. The lie was so smooth, so effortlessly delivered, that for a fraction of a second, I almost believed it. That's the thing about a truly gifted liar. They don't just deceive you, they make you question whether your own memory is the real fraud." "She never said that to you," I replied, my voice steady as a baseline free throw. "Rosemary and I talked about everything." "Not everything, Dad." His voice dropped into that low therapeutic register, the voice he used for his victims, the one that said, "I am safe, I am trustworthy, I am here to help you navigate the confusion of your declining years." Mom was protective of you. She didn't want you to worry, but she told me last summer that she was concerned about your cognitive sharpness. She said you were having trouble with the finances, mixing up dates, forgetting appointments. Every sentence was a brick in a wall being built between me and my own credibility. I understood the strategy with a sickening clarity. If I challenged him now, if I revealed what I knew, he would use this very conversation as evidence. He would tell Gerald, tell a judge, tell the evaluator that his father had become paranoid and combative, unable to distinguish reality from the grief-induced fantasies of a lonely old man. So I did what a coach does in the fourth quarter when the other team has the momentum and the clock is bleeding out. I ran the delay. I played soft. I gave him nothing. "Maybe you're right," I said, and the words tasted like swallowing gravel. "I have been a little foggy since the funeral. Let me rest tonight, and we'll sit down together tomorrow. Okay?" The flicker behind his eyes smoothed out. The shark submerged back below the warm surface of his smile. He patted my shoulder, his hand heavy and possessive. The touch of a man who believes he has already won. "That's all I want, Dad. Just for you to be taken care of." Mom would have wanted that. He gathered the folder, sliding it back into his leather messenger bag with the crisp efficiency of a man who closes deals for a living. "I'll come by tomorrow evening. We'll do it together. Maybe I'll bring Sophia. She misses you." Sophia. He said her name like a chess piece being placed on the board, a reminder of what I stood to lose if I stepped out of the role he had assigned me. The confused, compliant old man who signs what he's told to sign and thanks his son for handling the complicated stuff. "I'd like that," I said. "Bring her." He kissed my forehead on his way out. The gesture was so perfectly executed, so warm and filial, that anyone watching through the kitchen window would have seen a devoted son caring for his grieving father. But his lips were cold, and the pressure lasted a fraction too long, like a stamp being pressed into wax to seal a verdict. The back door clicked shut. His footsteps faded across the porch. The engine of his SUV turned over in the driveway, the rumble vibrating through the floorboards, and then the sound receded down Maple Avenue, until the only noise left was the ticking of the kitchen clock and the ragged sawing of my own breath. I stood in the kitchen for 5 full minutes without moving. Then I turned to the counter where his folder had been. There, half hidden beneath a stack of sympathy cards from the funeral, was a single sheet of paper he had either deliberately left behind or accidentally dislodged from his bag. I picked it up. The letterhead read, Lakeview Psychiatric Associates. Beneath it was a pre-scheduled appointment for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. My name was printed in the patient field. The date was 2 weeks from today. The referring physician was a name I didn't recognize. Someone who had never examined me, never spoken to me, never heard my voice. Brendan hadn't just been building a case. He had already set the machinery in motion. In 14 days, a stranger in a white coat would sit across from me with a clipboard and a checklist, and Brendan would be in the waiting room with Gerald and a stack of papers proving that poor old Coach Callahan couldn't remember where he parked his car, let alone manage his own finances. I held the appointment sheet until the paper wrinkled under my grip. The ticking of the kitchen clock sounded different now. Not like time passing. Like time running out. 14 days. 6 weeks to save the house. $4 million of stolen lives waiting for a voice brave enough to speak for them. And one son, circling the perimeter of my life with the patient efficiency of a predator who has already tasted blood and knows exactly where to bite next. I needed help. I needed it now. And I needed it from someone my son couldn't buy, couldn't charm, and couldn't silence. I walked to the trophy room and pulled Rosemary's letter from inside the '98 trophy base. My eyes found the name she had underlined twice. The name of the boy I had once pulled out of a police station at 2 in the morning and handed a basketball instead of a lecture. Marcus Rivera. Number 11. Point guard. Class of 2009. The one who can help you fight. Marcus Rivera's office was on the 7th floor of a pre-war building on LaSalle Street. The kind of structure that smelled of radiator heat and decades of legal arguments seeped into the plaster. I found his name on the directory beside the elevator, gold lettering on black plastic. Rivera Criminal Defense. The simplicity of it reminded me of the boy himself. No flash, no excess. Just the work. I hadn't called ahead. There are things you don't say over a phone line when your son has hired someone to watch your mirrors. I drove downtown at 7:30 in the morning, checking the rear view every 6 seconds, a habit that was now becoming as natural as breathing. No Charger. No SUV. Just the gray stream of commuter traffic on the Kennedy Expressway and the distant flat silver of Lake Michigan under a January sky that couldn't decide between snow and surrender. The elevator groaned upward with the arthritic slowness of a building that had seen better decades. When the doors opened on 7, I stepped into a narrow hallway with worn hardwood floors and the muted sound of someone arguing into a phone behind a closed door at the far end. The frosted glass of Marcus's door was the third on the right. I knocked twice and waited. The door opened, and there he was, 35 years old, broader in the shoulders than the wiry point guard I remembered, but with the same sharp, watchful eyes that used to read a defense before anyone else on the court could process what was happening. His hair was cut short and precise. His tie loosened at 9 in the morning in the way of a man who had already been working for hours. Recognition hit his face like a sunrise. Slow at first, then complete. Coach Callahan. Not a question. A statement. The same voice that used to call out screens and switches from the top of the key. Now deepened by 15 years of courtrooms and the particular gravity of defending people who had no one else. Marcus. I stood in his doorway holding the hard drive against my chest like a man presenting evidence to the only jury that mattered. I need your help. And I need you to close the door before I tell you why. He didn't hesitate. He stepped aside, ushered me into a small office, overflowing with case files and legal texts, stacked in towers that threatened to topple at the slightest provocation. The window behind his desk offered a narrow view of the Chicago skyline, the Willis Tower cutting through the gray like a black blade. He cleared a chair for me, moving a stack of depositions to the floor, and sat on the edge of his desk with his arms crossed, waiting. I told him everything, not in the careful, measured way Rosemary had laid it out in her files, but in the raw, ragged way of a man who had been carrying a weight alone for 6 days and had finally found someone strong enough to share the load. I told him about the shoebox, the letter, the war room, the 25 names on the wall, the forged signatures, the power of attorney, the medical records, the March 15th deadline, the appointment in 14 days. Marcus didn't interrupt. He listened the way I had taught him to listen 30 years ago. Eyes steady, jaw set, processing every piece of information like a play being drawn on a whiteboard, mapping the geometry of attack and defense. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the cold precision of a man who had already begun building a case in his head. Coach, 6 months ago, Brendan reached out to me. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. He called it a networking lunch, said he had an investment opportunity specifically designed for young professionals with, and I quote, strong community ties. Marcus uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. I knew something was wrong within the first 10 minutes. The returns he promised didn't match any legitimate market vehicle I'd ever seen. When I pushed back, he got nervous, changed the subject, paid for the lunch, and disappeared. Why didn't you report it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because he's your son, Coach. Marcus looked at me with an honesty that cut through the office air like a blade, and I had no proof. Just a bad lunch and a worse feeling. But I started keeping notes, just in case. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small moleskin notebook. Inside were dates, observations, fragments of conversations. Marcus had been watching Brendan for 6 months without a shred of hard evidence. And now I was sitting in his office holding the evidence his instinct had been waiting for. I placed the hard drive on his desk. The small black rectangle sat between us like a loaded weapon, its weight disproportionate to its size. Marcus plugged it into his laptop, and for the next 40 minutes, we scrolled through Rosemary's files in silence. I watched his face shift from professional focus to barely contained outrage as the scope of Brendan's operation revealed itself on screen. Then he found the audio file. It was labeled Brendan and VH, November 14th. Marcus clicked play, and the tinny sound of a recorded phone conversation filled the small office. Victor Hale's voice came first, nasal and impatient. How much longer on the Callahan house? My buyer is getting antsy. Then Brendan. Casual. Laughing. The sound of ice clinking in a glass. Once he's declared incompetent, we own the house free and clear. Gerald's got the evaluation scheduled. 2 weeks after that, the court grants me conservatorship, and the old man goes to Lakeview. He won't even remember his own name by then. We've got the medical records to prove it. Marcus stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of LaSalle Street traffic, 7 floors below. I stared at the laptop screen, at the audio waveform frozen mid-sentence, and felt something inside me calcify. The last soft corner of my heart, the corner that still hoped this was a misunderstanding, that still whispered, maybe Rosemary was wrong, turned to stone. That's your son's voice, Marcus said quietly, not asking. That's not my son, I replied. My son died somewhere between his first client dinner and his 3rd offshore wire transfer. The thing wearing his face is just a machine in a good suit. Marcus closed the laptop and stood up, moving to the window. He stared at the skyline for a long moment, his reflection ghosting against the glass. When he turned back, his expression had shifted from the empathy of a former student to the clinical focus of a criminal attorney preparing for war. Coach, This is enough to bring him down. The hard drive, the audio, your testimony about the forged power of attorney. But I need more than files to make this stick in a way he can't wriggle out of. He held up a finger. I need a face. A victim willing to go on the record. Publicly. With their name attached. Someone a jury can look at and understand exactly what was stolen. Can you give me that? I thought of J.T. Thompson. 17 years old, arms raised, confetti falling around us like golden snow in the Springfield arena. And then I thought of J.T., now 47, living in his sister's basement on the south side, because the man he called family had picked his pockets clean. I can give you that, I said. I know exactly who to call. The south side of Chicago in January is a landscape of contradiction. There is beauty in it. The warmth of kitchens visible through frost-laced windows. The laughter of kids chasing each other through snowbanks on their way home from school. But there is also the weight of a place that has been promised much and given little, where the architecture of broken systems shows in every shuttered storefront and pothole that never gets filled. I drove through it with the windows cracked, letting the cold sharpen my focus as I navigated streets I hadn't visited in nearly a decade. JT's sister lived on a narrow block off 63rd Street, in a red brick bungalow with a chain-link fence and a plastic-covered porch that rattled in the wind. I parked the Subaru at the curb and sat for a moment, watching my breath cloud the windshield. The last time I had seen JT was at a reunion dinner 4 years ago. He had been wearing a new jacket, laughing loudly, showing me pictures of his daughter's first communion on his phone. He had looked whole, prosperous, safe. I didn't know then that Brendan had already sunk his teeth in, that the new jacket was the last one JT would buy for a long time. I knocked on the storm door. The aluminum frame rattled like a tin drum. After a long pause, I heard footsteps, and then the inner door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes tired but sharp. "Can I help you?" she asked, one hand braced against the doorframe. "I'm looking for Jerome." "I'm Frank Callahan." His old coach. Her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Recognition. Surprise. Something darker that might have been anger or might have been pity. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared into the house. 3 minutes passed. I counted them by the rhythm of the wind against the plastic porch covering. Then I heard heavier footsteps, slow and reluctant, and JT appeared in the doorway. He looked smaller. Not physically. The man was still 6'3", still built like the athlete who had dominated the state tournament 30 years ago. But something in his posture had collapsed inward, as if he was trying to occupy less space in the world. He wore a gray sweatshirt that didn't fit right and house slippers that scraped against the linoleum. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a shame so complete it took my breath away. "Coach." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to see me like this. Jerome." I said his full name the way I always had. The way I used to say it before tip-offs and free throws, loading it with the authority and belief of a man who saw greatness in a teenager before the teenager could see it in himself. "Let me in, please." He stood aside. I entered a basement apartment, accessed through a door behind the kitchen. The ceiling was low, the single window at ground level, offering a view of frozen grass and the underside of a fence. A mattress on a box spring sat in one corner, neatly made. A folding table served as a desk, holding a laptop and a stack of job applications with handwritten notes in the margins. The space smelled of laundry detergent and something that might have been humiliation. This was where the captain of the 1994 state champions lived now, in his sister's basement. Because my son had told him he was family, we sat at the folding table. Two men separated by 30 years and $180,000 of stolen trust. JT couldn't look at me for the first several minutes. He stared at his own hands, massive hands that used to cradle a basketball like a grapefruit, now clenched on the tabletop, as if holding something invisible together. "I should have known," he said finally, his voice carrying the gravel of sleepless nights. The returns were too good. The language was too smooth. "But he came to my house, Coach. He sat at my table. He showed me a picture of you and him at Christmas and said, 'My dad trusts me with his own retirement, JT. Your family. What was I supposed to do? Tell a Callahan no? You were supposed to be able to trust a Callahan,' I said. 'That's on me.' He shook his head, a slow, heavy motion. 'You didn't rob me, Coach.' He looked up then, and his eyes held no anger toward me, only the ancient exhaustion of a man who had been carrying his own failure for too long. 'But you raised the man who did.' The words landed like a body blow. Precise. Unavoidable. True. I told him why I was there. I told him about the war room, the hard drive, Marcus, the audio recording. I told him that we had enough evidence to bring Brendan down, but that we needed someone willing to stand in the light and be seen. A face, a name, a story that couldn't be dismissed as paperwork or misunderstanding. JT listened without interrupting. When I finished, he reached under the mattress and pulled out a manila envelope, creased and worn at the edges, as if it had been handled many times. "He sent me this 3 weeks ago," JT said, sliding the envelope across the table. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement and a cashier's check for $5,000. $5,000. That's what my silence is worth to him. 0.03% of what he stole. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just the dry, mechanical sound of a man who had run out of tears a long time ago. "I didn't sign it," JT continued. "And the next day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Male voice. Professional. He told me that my sister's house is on a variable rate mortgage and that it would be a real shame if someone purchased that note." He said the words, "real shame," twice, Coach, like he was savoring them. Curtis Vance. The name surfaced in my mind like a shark fin breaking water. The man in the Charger, the man on my porch, the same cold professional voice now reaching into JT's life, squeezing the one safe place he had left. "You don't have to do this, Jerome." I said it because it needed to be said. Because consent under pressure is not consent at all. "I won't think less of you if you say no. Your sister's home is not a price I'm willing to ask." JT stood up from the folding table. At his full height, in that low-ceilinged basement, he had to tilt his head slightly to avoid the overhead pipes. He looked at me with something that might have been the ghost of the 17-year-old who once believed he could do anything if his coach believed it first. "You pulled me out of nothing, Coach. You gave me a jersey and told me I could be somebody. That was worth more than any money." He extended his hand. "I'll stand up. I'll say his name in any room you need me to. But you should know, I'm not the only one he tried to silence. He told me about Danny Whitmore. Number 7. Shooting guard. Danny had tried to file a police report 3 months ago. The next night, his car was broken into. Not his wallet stolen. Not his radio ripped out. His entire glove compartment emptied. Financial records. Bank statements. The file he had been building on his own, independent of Rosemary, gone in a single night. "Danny's scared now," JT said. "Real scared. But if he sees me standing up, maybe he stands up too. That's how it works, right, Coach? One man runs the floor, and the rest follow." I gripped his hand and held it. "That's exactly how it works, Jerome." I noticed the Dodge Charger again on the 4th day after my first visit to the war room. It was parked outside the Jewel Osco on Central Street while I bought milk and bread I didn't need. A performance of normalcy for whoever was watching. The next morning, it idled 3 blocks from Marcus's building as I left our second meeting. By the afternoon, it sat in the parking lot of St. Mary's while I lit a candle for Rosemary and pretended to pray, though my real prayers were all aimed at the rearview mirror. The driver never got out. Never rolled down his window. The car simply existed in my orbit, like a cold satellite, tracking my every rotation. its presence designed not to be hidden, but to be felt. This wasn't surveillance. It was a message. We see you. We know where you go. We know who you talk to. On the fifth night, the message became a conversation. I was in the kitchen at 8:40 in the evening, washing dishes I had already washed twice, when 3 heavy knocks landed on the back door. Not the front, the back. A deliberate choice. The back door was private, hidden from the street by the fence and the old oak tree. Whoever was knocking wanted the neighbors to sleep through this visit. I dried my hands on the dish towel, the cotton rough against my palms, and moved to the door. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see a shape. Large, still, patient as a stone. I opened the door 6 inches, leaving the chain on. The porch light caught the face of a man I had never seen up close, but recognized immediately from the silhouette that had been following me for days. He was tall, broad through the chest, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts of other, harder faces. His hair was cropped, military short, and his eyes held the flat, disinterested gaze of a man who had long ago stopped seeing other humans as anything more than problems to be managed. Mr. Callahan. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant, the way the surface of a frozen lake is pleasant until you realize what's drowning beneath it. My name is Curtis Vance. I'm a family consultant your son Brendan has retained to ensure your well-being during this difficult transition. I don't need a consultant, I said through the 6-inch gap. He smiled. The smile didn't move above his cheekbones. May I come in? The cold is rather aggressive tonight. Say what you came to say, Mr. Vance. The chain stays on. He shifted his weight, his leather shoes creaking on the frozen porch boards. He didn't seem bothered by the refusal. If anything, he seemed amused by it. The way a cat is amused by a mouse that has backed itself into an entertaining corner. Your son cares about you deeply, Mr. Callahan. He's concerned about some of the decisions you've been making since Mrs. Callahan's passing. The early morning drives, the visits to unfamiliar addresses, the meetings with individuals who might take advantage of a man in your emotional state. He let each sentence land with the precision of a dropped stone, watching my face for the ripple. I gave him nothing. 38 years of fourth-quarter pressure had taught me that the face is the first thing an opponent reads. Sophia is such a talented girl, he continued, his tone shifting to something almost conversational. Brendan showed me her school photos. 6th grade at Nichols Academy, isn't it? Wonderful program. Very selective about the families they admit. They have quite a reputation to protect. The implication hung in the frozen air between us like a blade suspended on a thread. He wasn't threatening to hurt Sophia physically. He was threatening to annihilate her world, to drag the Callahan name through a scandal that would make her school, her friends, her carefully constructed 11-year-old universe uninhabitable. You're threatening a child to silence an old man, I said, my voice flat, as a line on a dead man's heart monitor. I'm protecting a family, Mr. Callahan. He reached into his coat and produced a business card, sliding it through the gap in the door. Sometimes protection requires difficult conversations. Then he leaned closer, his breath visible in the cold, carrying the faint chemical scent of mouthwash, masking something stronger underneath. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That apartment on Clark Street? Nice place. Your wife had interesting taste in wallpaper. Red thread. Index cards. Very decorative. He pulled back, straightening his coat. I understand it's been cleaned up now. These old buildings, you know. Vandals. Terrible neighborhood. My blood crystallized. Not froze. Crystallized. Became something sharper and harder than ice. Something with edges that could cut from the inside out. Good night, Mr. Callahan. Think about what's best for everyone, especially the little one. He descended the porch steps with the unhurried gait of a man who had delivered his payload and knew it would detonate on its own schedule. The Charger's headlights flared to life at the curb, and within 30 seconds, the street was empty again. The silence of Maple Avenue pressing in like a held breath. I didn't think. I grabbed my coat, my keys, the car already running in my mind before my hand touched the ignition. The drive to Clark Street took 11 minutes. I drove through 2 yellow lights and 1 outright red. The Subaru's engine whining in protest as I pushed it past 60 on residential streets. When I reached 614 Clark Street, I took the stairs 2 at a time, my knees screaming in protest, my hand already gripping the brass key. But I didn't need it. The door to apartment 4B was open. Not unlocked. Open. The frame was splintered where a crowbar or a heavy boot had forced the latch. I pushed the door the rest of the way and stepped inside. The war room was destroyed. Every photograph torn from the wall. Every index card ripped in half. The red thread lay in tangles on the floor, like veins pulled from a body. The desk drawers were emptied, their contents scattered. The tablet was gone. The legal pads were gone. The filing cabinet had been tipped onto its side, its empty drawers gaping like open mouths screaming at the ceiling. I stood in the center of the wreckage, my pulse hammering in my temples, the smell of torn paper and disturbed dust filling my lungs. They had been thorough, professional. Every visible piece of evidence Rosemary had assembled over 2 years of painstaking work had been shredded, stolen, or destroyed. But my hand moved to my coat pocket, and my fingers closed around the hard drive. Small, black, cold, still there, still mine. Rosemary's voice echoed in my memory with the clarity of a woman who had anticipated this exact moment. Take the hard drive first. Everything else is a decoy. Everything else. The entire war room. The photographs, the thread, the notes, the tablet. She had built it knowing it would be found, knowing it would be destroyed. She had constructed an elaborate stage set designed to give Brendan the satisfaction of demolition, while the real weapon, the only weapon that mattered, walked out the door in my pocket on day 1. My wife had played my son like a fiddle, and she had done it from beyond the grave. I pulled the damaged door shut as best I could and descended the stairs on legs that trembled not from fear, but from a strange, fierce pride. Rosemary hadn't just been a mother investigating her son. She had been a general fighting a war with a chess master's patience and a surgeon's precision. The decoy worked. The hard drive was safe. And tomorrow, I would deliver it to the one person who could turn its contents into a weapon Brendan could not destroy. Marcus made the call on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor of the Chicago Tribune building, the institutional hum of a working newsroom bleeding through the thin walls like the pulse of a living organism. The room smelled of dry erase markers and reheated coffee, the particular scent of people who spend their days turning other people's worst moments into public record. Diane Cho was already seated when we arrived. She rose to shake my hand, her grip firm and brief, her eyes performing a rapid assessment that reminded me of the way a point guard reads the court in the first 3 seconds of a possession. She was 40, compact, dressed in a blazer over a plain black shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail that said she had stopped caring about aesthetics approximately 8 deadlines ago. "Mr. Callahan," she said, sitting back down and flipping open a leather-bound notebook already half-filled with dense handwriting. "Marcus tells me you have something that could close a door I've been knocking on for 6 months. 6 months? I asked, settling into the hard plastic chair across from her. Marcus stood by the door, his arms crossed, watching the hallway through the narrow glass panel like a man who had learned that privacy was never guaranteed. Diane tapped her pen against the notebook. "I've received 3 anonymous complaints about Brendan Callahan's firm over the past 2 years. 2 from individuals who refused to identify themselves. 1 from a woman who gave her name but retracted her statement 72 hours later." She paused, letting the weight of that timeline register. "I wrote a 4,000-word piece connecting the complaints to a pattern of predatory investment practices targeting seniors. My editor pulled it 3 months ago. Insufficient sourcing. No physical corroboration. No one willing to go on record. She looked at the hard drive sitting on the table between us like a black pearl on a bed of beige laminate. Is that what I think it is? It's everything, I said. 2 years of my wife's investigation. Audio recordings. Bank statements. Email chains. Forged documents. A complete map of the operation. Diane didn't reach for it immediately. She studied my face for a long moment, and I saw something shift behind her professional mask. Not pity. Recognition. The look of a woman who understands what it costs a man to hand over the evidence that will destroy his own bloodline. I need you to understand something, Mr. Callahan, she said, her voice dropping to a register that felt private, despite the institutional setting. Once I verify this material, once it goes to print, there is no taking it back. Your son's name, your granddaughter's name, they all become part of the public record. The internet doesn't forget. School friends, Google each other's parents, future employers run background checks. This will follow your family for decades. It's already following 25 families, I replied. They just don't know yet that someone finally found the source. She nodded once, reached for the hard drive, and plugged it into her laptop. For the next hour, the room was silent, except for the clicking of her trackpad and the occasional sharp intake of breath as she scrolled through files that laid bare the full architecture of my son's machinery. Marcus and I sat in a silence that felt almost sacred. The silence of witnesses watching a surgeon open a chest cavity to find what everyone feared was already there. At the 40-minute mark, Diane stopped scrolling. Her face had gone pale in the bluish glow of the laptop. Mr. Callahan, are you aware that your son holds a 12% equity stake in Lakeview Assisted Living? I frowned. The psychiatric facility. The one where the evaluation is scheduled. The same. She turned the laptop toward me. On screen was a corporate filing from the Illinois Secretary of State's office. Brendan's name appeared on the board of investors for Lakeview Holdings LLC, dated 18 months ago. He didn't just schedule your cognitive evaluation at a facility where he could influence the outcome. He invested in the facility first. He's paying himself to imprison you. The circularity of it was so perfect, so mechanically elegant in its evil, that I almost laughed. Almost. He would declare me incompetent, place me in a facility he partially owned, charge my estate for the care, and profit from my captivity, while my house was sold to cover costs that went directly back into his pocket. It was a closed loop of parasitism, a machine that consumed its own family and converted the remains into quarterly dividends. This changes everything, Diane said, closing the laptop with a decisive click. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is racketeering. This is conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment. The moment he signed those investment papers and then scheduled your evaluation, he created a paper trail that any federal prosecutor would salivate over. She pulled out her phone and typed rapidly, her thumbs moving with the practiced speed of someone who sends 50 messages before noon. I'm reaching out to my contact at the FBI field office. They need to see this before we publish. If we time it right, the arrest and the article drop on the same day. He won't have time to run. Marcus spoke for the first time since we entered the room. How long do you need? 1 week, Diane said. 7 days to verify signatures, confirm the offshore accounts, and get FBI sign-off on timing. Can you keep him unaware for 7 days? 7 days. I thought about the evaluation scheduled in 14, now reduced to 10 since my meeting with Marcus. I thought about March 15th, and the house, and the forged power of attorney sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere waiting to be activated. 7 days was the width of a razor blade. But it was enough. I can keep him unaware, I said. I've been playing dumb for 10 days already. 7 more won't kill me. Diane stood, extending her hand across the table. Mr. Callahan, your wife was extraordinary. This level of documentation, this precision. She did the work of a federal investigation team with nothing but a laptop and a bus pass. She did it with a broken heart. I said. That's harder than any badge. Marcus and I left the Tribune building through a side entrance, the January wind hitting us like a wall of frozen needles the moment we stepped outside. I felt lighter than I had since the shoebox. The hard drive was now copied, backed up on Tribune servers, and in the process of being transmitted to a federal agent who specialized in elder fraud. The weight was shared. The secret was no longer mine alone. We were halfway to the parking garage when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out expecting Marcus's office number, or perhaps Diane with a follow-up question. It was a text from Sophia. "Grandpa, Daddy says we're moving away. He says you're sick and we can't see you anymore. Is that true? Are you sick? Please tell me the truth. I miss you." I stood on the sidewalk, the wind tearing at my coat, staring at the small bright screen until the words blurred. Marcus read over my shoulder and said nothing. There was nothing to say. My son wasn't just building a legal cage for me. He was salting the earth between me and the only piece of Rosemary that still walked this world. I typed back with fingers that shook not from the cold. "I am not sick, sweetheart. I love you more than all the stars. And I promise you, on your grandmother's name, I will see you soon. Don't believe everything you hear. Believe what you feel." I hit send and slid the phone away. 7 days. I had 7 days to save 25 lives, protect my home, and find a way back to an 11-year-old girl who was being taught that her grandfather was a ghost. The mistake came on a Thursday night, 11 days after the funeral, in the form of a $68 bottle of Jameson and the kind face of a man I had trusted for 30 years. Ray Dalton showed up at my door at 7 in the evening, unannounced, carrying the whiskey and a Tupperware of his wife Linda's beef stew. He scanned the kitchen behind me, taking in the unwashed cups and unopened sympathy cards, and stepped inside without being invited, the way only a friend of 3 decades can. "You look like hell, Frank," he said, pulling 2 glasses from the cabinet with the familiarity of someone who had eaten at this island 1,000 times. "Talk to me." Ray Dalton, my assistant coach for 19 years. The man who ran the defense while I ran the offense, who shared 1,000 post-game beers and stood beside me at Rosemary's casket, weeping without shame. If there was a person on earth I should have been able to trust, it was Ray. That's what exhaustion does. It erodes judgment. It convinces you that sharing the burden halves it, when in truth, some burdens only multiply when spoken aloud. We drank 3 glasses each over 2 hours. Enough on an empty stomach after 11 days of insomnia to loosen the mortar between the bricks of even the most disciplined wall. Ray talked about Rosemary, about retirement, and slowly drew me toward the edge of the cliff I had been so careful to avoid. "Something's eating you, Frank. It's not just grief. You've got that fourth quarter look. The one you get when you're calculating something nobody else can see." I should have deflected. Instead, I heard my own voice saying words I had promised Rosemary I would never say without Marcus's guidance. "Brendan isn't who we think he is, Ray. Rosemary found something before she died. Financial stuff. He's been stealing from people. From our people. I didn't give him everything. No hard drive, no war room, no Marcus, no Diane. But I said the words offshore accounts and power of attorney and fraud, and I watched Ray's face transform from concern to horror to a trembling disbelief that told me I had made a catastrophic error. He left at 10:30. I watched his taillights disappear and felt the cold certainty of regret settle into my chest. Ray Dalton was loyal. He was also frightened, and frightened men talk. What I couldn't have predicted was that Ray would go home and tell Linda everything at midnight, prefacing it with, "I'm scared for Frank." That Linda, whose heart was wide as Lake Michigan, and whose discretion was the size of a thimble, would call her sister the next morning. That her sister would mention it at a PTA meeting. That within 48 hours, the words Frank Callahan and financial fraud and his own son would be circulating through the Evanston community grapevine with the velocity of a brush fire in August. Marcus called Saturday morning at 7 for Jamet. To Jamet, "Someone in the athletic boosters is talking about you finding fraud documents. It's vague, but it's out there. If it reached me in 48 hours, it reached Brendan in 12. I closed my eyes. The kitchen clock ticked, like a countdown reaching its final digits. By noon, the confirmation arrived. An email from Gerald Hoffman, attorney at law, Brendan CC'd. Subject line: urgent, expedited wellness assessment. 3 paragraphs of legal language that boiled down to a single devastating reality. The cognitive evaluation had been moved forward. It was now scheduled for Monday morning. 72 hours. The email cited accelerated concerns from family members regarding erratic behavior, unfounded accusations, and potential paranoid ideation. It referenced multiple community reports of confused statements made by Mr. Family Callahan regarding his son's practice. Every word Linda passed along had been harvested, repackaged, and weaponized in less than 2 days. Have you ever watched a clock knowing every tick was a nail being driven into a coffin built around you while you're still breathing? In 3 days, I would be sitting at Lakeview, a facility my son partially owned, evaluated by a doctor I'd never met, based on forged records. If that evaluation went Brendan's way, my testimony would become legally worthless. The hard drive, the recordings, the signatures, all dismissed as paranoid delusions. I called Marcus at 11:45 Saturday night. He answered on the first ring. He moved the evaluation to Monday, I said. 72 hours. If that assessment goes through, everything becomes inadmissible. A long pause. The sound of a mind working at maximum velocity behind the silence. Then we don't wait for the Tribune timeline. We bring him to us before Monday. We create a situation he can't refuse, surrounded by people he can't silence, and we put the evidence in the air where no evaluation can bury it. How? A reunion coach. 38 years of the Callahan legacy. Every player you ever coached, every family he ever robbed, gathered in one room. He can't refuse without raising suspicion. And once he's inside, we give him the 4th quarter he's earned. The silence between us hummed with the electricity of a plan taking shape. How do you feel about one last game, coach? I looked at the kitchen clock. 69 hours remaining. Set it up, I said. I'll make the calls. Every great play starts with a whiteboard and a marker. This one started at 2 in the morning in Marcus Rivera's office. The overhead fluorescents buzzing like trapped insects, the remnants of cold pizza congealing in a box on the filing cabinet, and a dry erase board commandeered from the conference room next door propped against the window. Marcus drew the framework while I paced. Diane Cho sat cross-legged on the floor with her laptop open, her phone wedged between her shoulder and ear, as she whispered to her FBI contact in the clipped, precise language of someone negotiating a timeline that had just been compressed from 7 days to 48 hours. The venue has to mean something, Marcus said, uncapping a red marker. Somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses, somewhere he can't claim he was ambushed in private. The gymnasium, I said. The words came out before I had finished thinking them, rising from a place deeper than strategy. Evanston Township. The same floor where I coached for 38 years. The same bleachers where half those boys became men. Marcus looked at me, and I saw the recognition in his eyes. It wasn't just a tactical choice. It was a statement. The same floor Brendan had walked across 1,000 times as a child, sitting in the front row of the bleachers doing homework while I ran practice. The same floor where he learned that the Callahan name meant something. We would reclaim that floor. We would make it mean something again. I'll call the school board, I said. They owe me 38 years of favors. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. A celebration. The 38th anniversary of Coach Callahan's first state championship. Invitations sent to every former player, every booster, every family connected to the program. A celebration of legacy, a night of gratitude. And at the center of it all, the guest of honor's own son, invited to deliver a toast to his father's career. Brendan could not refuse. Declining an invitation to publicly honor his father, especially in the midst of his campaign to declare me incompetent, would shatter the image of the devoted son he had so carefully constructed. He would come. He would smile. He would shake hands and accept compliments and never see the walls closing in around him. Diane handles the audio set. JT and the others stand up during the toast, I added. They tell their stories. They name the amounts. They look him in the face. And the FBI? Diane looked up from her laptop, her phone now silent, a grim satisfaction settling into her features. My contact confirmed they can have a team in the parking lot within 90 seconds of a signal. They won't enter the building unless we call them in. This has to feel organic, not orchestrated. I nodded. The timing had to be precise. Too early, and Brendan would claim entrapment. Too late, and he might find a way to slip out a side door. The moment had to come when the weight of 25 voices had pinned him to the floor, when the room itself had rendered its verdict, and the handcuffs were simply the punctuation at the end of a sentence already spoken. Marcus assigned the remaining roles. He would position himself near the main entrance as legal counsel, ready to invoke the formal language of a citizen's arrest if necessary. Diane would be in the sound booth with a direct line to the FBI team. I would be at the podium. What's my line? I asked. What do I say to get him on that stage? You don't need a line, coach. Marcus capped the marker and set it down. You just need to be a father. One last time. Invite him up to say a few words about your legacy. He won't be able to resist. His ego is the biggest unlock we have. The next 6 hours were spent on the phone. I sat in Marcus's office chair, the leather creaking with each shift of my weight, and dialed number after number from the alumni directory I had kept in my desk drawer for 3 decades. The calls were brief. The conversations were not. Coach, it's 2 a.m. What's wrong? I need you to be somewhere Sunday night. I need you to trust me the way you trusted me when you were 17. Can you do that? Some said yes immediately, their voices thick with sleep, but sharp with loyalty. Some needed convincing. Some wept when I told them what Brendan had done. Danny Whitmore's voice cracked so badly he had to hand the phone to his wife, who said simply, "We'll be there, Coach." Both of us. By 8 a.m, the count was final. 15 out of 25 confirmed. 15 men and their families willing to walk into a gymnasium on a Sunday night and face the man who had stolen their futures. 15 voices that would stand when called and speak when the moment demanded it. Then Marcus made one final call. When he hung up, his face carried an expression I hadn't seen before, something between awe and vindication. Coach, I need to tell you something. He set his phone on the desk between us. The FBI didn't just start watching Brendan because of Diane's contact. They've had a file open on him for 4 months. 4 months? An anonymous tip was submitted to the Chicago field office in September. Detailed. Specific. Names. Account numbers. Transaction dates. The agent I spoke to said it was the most organized civilian complaint they'd ever received. Marcus looked at me with something close to reverence. It was submitted under the name Rose Malone. The room went silent. The fluorescent lights hummed. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like sunlight breaking through a year of clouds, that Rosemary hadn't just been preparing me for this fight. She had been preparing the entire battlefield, every institution, every ally, every weapon. She had loaded the guns months before she handed me the map. Your wife didn't just leave breadcrumbs, Coach, Marcus said quietly. She left a loaded weapon pointed at the door. She just needed someone to pull the trigger. I looked at the whiteboard. The plan laid out in red and black marker. The names, the timeline, the venue, the moment of truth, scheduled for Sunday night at 7. Exactly 24 hours before the evaluation that would silence me forever. Last quarter, Rosie. I whispered to the empty air between us. We're taking the shot. The gymnasium at Evanston Township High School hadn't changed in the 4 years since my retirement. The same honey-colored hardwood floor, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the overhead lights like a frozen lake at noon. The same retractable bleachers, their wooden slats worn smooth by generations of spectators. The same championship banners hanging from the rafters, their gold and navy fabric stirring slightly in the current from the heating vents. And above the main entrance, stretched between two support beams, a new addition. A white vinyl banner that read, 38 Years of Callahan Legacy in navy lettering. I arrived at 5:30, 90 minutes before the doors opened. The gymnasium smelled of floor wax and the particular metallic tang of the sound system warming up. Diane was already in the booth above the bleachers, testing microphone levels, her laptop connected to speakers that would carry every word spoken on the court floor to every corner of the building. Marcus stood near the main entrance in a charcoal suit, looking less like a lawyer and more like a bouncer, his eyes tracking the empty parking lot through the glass doors. J.T. Thompson arrived at 6:15, wearing a pressed white shirt and beneath his open jacket the faded navy of his old number 23 jersey. He caught my eye across the court and nodded once. Behind him came Danny Whitmore, then Carlos Medina. Then a stream of faces I hadn't seen gathered in one place since the last real reunion 5 years ago. They moved quietly, taking seats in the lower bleachers with the deliberate solemnity of people who understood they were here for something far heavier than nostalgia. By 6:55, 200 people filled the gymnasium. Former players, their wives, boosters, neighbors, colleagues from the school district. The noise level rose to a comfortable murmur, the sound of a community reconnecting over paper cups of punch and the shared mythology of championship seasons. But beneath the warmth, I could feel it. The 15 knew. They sat scattered through the crowd like loaded springs, their laughter a fraction too loud, their eyes returning to the main entrance every few seconds. At 7:03, the doors opened, and Brendan walked in. He was wearing a navy blazer over a white Oxford shirt, his hair freshly cut, his smile deployed at full wattage before he had taken 3 steps into the room. Meredith was beside him in a gray dress, her hand resting on his arm, with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned to accessorize a lie. Sophia wasn't with them. I noted that with a cold precision that surprised me. Brendan moved through the crowd like a candidate working a rope line. Handshakes, shoulder claps, the warm conspiratorial lean-in that said, "We're all family here." He found me near the podium and embraced me, his arms strong around my shoulders, his cologne filling my nostrils with that expensive cold scent I now associated with the smell of a crime scene. "This is incredible, Dad," he said, pulling back to gesture at the room. "You deserve every bit of this. I'm so proud of you." I looked into his eyes and saw nothing. Not guilt. Not fear. Not even the faintest flicker of awareness that he was standing in the center of a trap designed by the 2 people who should have loved him most. He was the architect of his own destruction, and he had walked in through the front door smiling. At 7:20, I took the podium. The microphone gave a small pop as I adjusted it, and the room gradually fell silent, the last whispers dying like embers in a cooling fire. 200 faces looked up at me. I felt the familiar weight of their attention, the same weight I had carried before every halftime speech and pregame address for 38 years. But tonight, the words I was about to speak would not inspire a comeback. They would end a life. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady, filling the gymnasium with the resonance of a man accustomed to being heard across large spaces. 38 years. That's how long this floor has been my second home. Some of you sat in these bleachers as boys, and now your own sons sit where you sat. That means something to me. It means everything. I paused, letting my eyes sweep the crowd, finding JT in the 3rd row, Danny beside him, Carlos 2 rows back, their faces still, their bodies coiled. But tonight, I don't want to talk about championships. I want to talk about trust, about what it means when someone says the word family and uses it as a key to open doors that should have stayed locked. The shift in the room was instantaneous. A subtle tightening, like the air before a thunderstorm drops in pressure. Brendan's smile remained fixed, but I saw his left hand move to his pocket, reaching for his phone, his instinct telling him something his ego refused to accept. "I'd like to play something for you," I said, stepping back from the microphone and nodding toward the sound booth. Diane pressed play. The gymnasium filled with the sound of my son's voice, amplified through the same speakers that had blasted warm-up music and buzzer-beater celebrations for 4 decades. The audio quality was sharp, Rosemary's recording clean and damning. These loyal puppies won't question a thing as long as they think Dad's name is on the door. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear the banner above the entrance shifting in the heating current. 200 people stared at the speakers, as if the voice might take it back, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something innocent. Then the second clip. Brendan laughing. Ice clinking. The old man won't even remember his own name by then. "We've got the medical records to prove it." Brendan stood up. His face had drained of all color, the confident mask crumbling in real time, replaced by the wild, scanning eyes of an animal that has just realized the clearing it walked into has no exit. He opened his mouth, but before any sound emerged, J.T. Thompson rose from the third row. "My name is Jerome Thompson," J.T. said, his voice filling the space without a microphone, carrying the authority of a man who had spent months being silenced and was finally free. Number 23. State champion, 1994. Brendan Callahan stole $180,000 from me. He sat at my kitchen table, called me family, and then he took everything I had. Danny Whitmore stood next. Danny Whitmore. Number 7. $195,000. Carlos Medina. $210,000. One by one. They rose like dominoes falling in reverse, each man standing taller than the one before, each voice steadier, each number landing in the silent gymnasium like a stone dropped into still water. 5, 8, 11, 14, 15 men standing in a gymnasium that had once made them feel invincible, looking at the man who had made them feel worthless, and taking their names back. J.T. turned to face Brendan directly. The overhead lights caught the faded 23 on his jersey, the fabric stretched tight across shoulders that refused to slump anymore. "You told me I was family," J.T. said, his voice barely above a whisper that somehow reached every corner of the room. "You told me Coach would vouch for you. You used the best man I ever knew to steal the only future I had." He straightened to his full height. "Now he's the one standing up, and you're the one on your knees." The gymnasium erupted, not in cheers, in something heavier, a sound like a collective exhale held for months finally released, mixed with the sharp, rhythmic clapping of hands that had once celebrated victories and were now celebrating something harder, something costlier, something that looked like justice, dressed in the clothes of grief. The applause hadn't finished settling when Brendan moved. Not toward the podium, not toward me, toward the side exit, the door behind the bleachers that led to the equipment hallway, and the parking lot beyond. He moved with the sudden, desperate speed of a man who has finally understood that the room he's standing in is not a celebration but a cage. He made it 12 steps. I counted them the way I used to count fast-break possessions, each footfall a beat, in a rhythm I had spent decades measuring. On the 13th step, the side door swung open from the outside, and the blue glow of emergency lights from the parking lot spilled across the hardwood floor like a cold dawn. 2 men in dark windbreakers stood in the doorway, their posture unmistakable. Feet planted, shoulders square. The letters FBI visible in yellow block print across their chests even in the gymnasium's harsh overhead light. Behind them, through the open door, I could see the red and blue pulse of unmarked vehicles in the parking lot, their lights rotating in a silent rhythm that painted the snow in alternating color. Brendan stopped. His body went rigid, the momentum of his escape meeting the immovable wall of federal authority and converting instantly to a vibration I could see from 30 feet away. His shoulders began to tremble. Marcus stepped forward from his position near the main entrance, his voice carrying across the silent gymnasium with the calm, measured authority of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. Brendan Callahan. These agents are here pursuant to a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment. I would advise you not to run. The gymnasium was so quiet I could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights in the ceiling. A high, thin sound like the whine of a mosquito trapped in amber. 200 people held their breath. Meredith, still seated in the bleachers, pressed both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide above her fingers. The agents moved with a practiced efficiency that transformed the moment from spectacle to procedure. One positioned himself behind Brendan while the other reached for his wrist. The sound of the handcuff clicking shut echoed off the hardwood floor and the concrete block walls with a metallic finality that I will carry in my ears for the rest of my days. Click, click, 2 sounds. One for each wrist. One for each half of a life divided permanently into before and after. Brendan didn't struggle. The fight had gone out of him in the space between JT's words and the opening of that side door. He stood with his arms behind his back, his navy blazer bunching at the shoulders, his head bowed so that I couldn't see his face. The gymnasium lights made the gel in his freshly cut hair shine, a small vanity that now looked grotesque against the steel on his wrists. As the agents turned him toward the door, he looked back. Not at Meredith. Not at the crowd. At me. His eyes found mine across 30 feet of polished hardwood. And what I saw there was not the cold, calculating emptiness of the man who had sat in my kitchen and tried to steal my signature. It was something else. Something smaller. The look of a boy who had broken a window with a baseball and stood in the backyard knowing the front door was about to open. The look of a child who had been caught and, for one flickering moment, wanted his father to make it stop. I did not look away. I owed him that. I owed myself that. A father's last duty is to witness. Even when witnessing is the hardest thing left to do. The side door closed behind him. The sound of footsteps faded into the parking lot. The red and blue lights continued their silent rotation through the high windows, painting the gymnasium walls in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat slowing down. Does justice feel like victory? I can tell you with absolute certainty that it does not. It feels like surgery performed without anesthesia. It feels like setting a bone that has been broken for so long the body has learned to walk crooked. It is necessary. It is right. And it is the loneliest sound in the world. The crowd began to move. Slowly at first. Then with the murmuring energy of people who have witnessed something they will spend weeks processing. Hands touched my shoulders as they passed. Some squeezed. Some lingered. No one spoke to me directly. They understood, in the way communities understand without being told, that there are no words for what had just happened, and that attempting them would be an intrusion. JT was the last to approach. He didn't speak. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder. The same shoulder he had gripped 30 years ago after the state championship buzzer, and held it there for 10 seconds. Then he walked toward the exit, his number 23 jersey disappearing into the stream of bodies heading for the parking lot. Within 20 minutes, the gymnasium was empty. Diane had packed her equipment and left with Marcus to file the preliminary documentation. The custodial staff would arrive in the morning to fold the chairs and take down the banner. For now, the room was mine. I stood at center court, my shoes on the half-court line, the same spot where I had stood for 1,000 tip-offs and 1,000 pep talks, and 1,000 moments when I believed that the hardest thing a man could do was lose a basketball game. The banner above the entrance stirred in the heating current. 38 years of Callahan legacy. Legacy. What does that word mean when the man who carried your name into the future used it as a crowbar to pry open the lives of people who loved you? What is left when you subtract the theft and the lies and the handcuffs from a family tree? I looked up at the championship banners in the rafters. 1994, 1998, 2003. Fabric and thread and memory. They weren't the legacy. They never were. The legacy was 15 men who stood up in a room full of their peers and said their names out loud. The legacy was the sound of a community refusing to be silent. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting Marcus or Diane with an update on the booking process. The screen displayed a text from a number I didn't recognize. The words were brief and delivered with the blunt economy of a man who had nothing left to lose. "This isn't over, Callahan. Victor Hale doesn't forget." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned it off, slid it back into my pocket, and walked toward the main entrance. The parking lot was empty except for my Subaru and the distant taillights of the last departing guests. The cold hit me immediately. Sharp and clean, carrying the smell of snow and exhaust and the faint mineral taste of a city settling into night. The game wasn't over. But the fourth quarter was mine. Before I reveal what happened next, I want to hear from you. If you were standing where I stood tonight, looking at the man your son became through the bars of a police car window, would you feel righteous or broken? Comment your answer. I genuinely want to know how you see this choice, because even now, standing in an empty parking lot with the taste of justice and ash on my tongue, I am not sure I know the answer myself. Diane Cho's article went live at 6 in the morning, 47 hours after the gymnasium. I read it on my laptop in the kitchen. The blue glow of the screen. The only light in the room. A cup of coffee, growing cold beside me. The headline was a scalpel. Beloved coach's son accused of systematic fraud against elderly athletes. Evidence compiled by late wife. Below it, 4,000 words of meticulous journalism that laid bare every thread Rosemary had woven. Every dollar Brendan had stolen. Every life he had gutted with a smile and a handshake. By noon, the story had been picked up by national outlets. By evening, Victor Hale was in federal custody, arrested at O'Hare Airport with a one-way ticket to Zurich and $3.1 million in offshore account access credentials on his laptop. He didn't even make it past the TSA checkpoint. Curtis Vance was picked up at his apartment the following morning, charged with stalking, intimidation, and conspiracy. His Dodge Charger was impounded. I never saw it again. The cognitive evaluation scheduled for Monday was canceled before I had to request it. Gerald Hoffman, Brendan's attorney, withdrew the petition within hours of the article's publication, citing changed circumstances. The forged medical records were flagged and submitted to the state medical board for investigation. The doctor, whose name appeared on them, claimed he had never seen them before. I believed him. Brendan had been thorough, but thoroughness becomes a liability when every document you forged becomes evidence of an additional felony. The weeks that followed moved with the strange, compressed temporality of a life being disassembled and rebuilt simultaneously. Meredith called me on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the arrest. Her voice was thin and stripped of the polished confidence I had always associated with her. She told me she had been cooperating with the FBI for 2 weeks, providing passwords to encrypted files that Rosemary's investigation hadn't been able to crack. She told me she was filing for divorce, and she told me that Sophia asked about me every day. "She doesn't blame you," Meredith said, and I could hear the sound of her own surprise at the words. She blames him. She's 11 years old, and she already sees it more clearly than I did in 15 years of marriage. The trial came in October. 8 months of legal preparation compressed into a 3-day proceeding that felt both endless and impossibly brief. I sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse, the same wooden pew hardness beneath me that I had felt in 100 gymnasiums, watching the prosecution present evidence that Rosemary had spent 2 years of her dying life assembling. Brendan sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit properly. He had lost weight. His hair was longer, less groomed. The expensive architecture of his appearance beginning to collapse without the money and freedom to maintain it. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he stood and delivered a 90-second statement about accountability and growth that sounded like it had been written by a consultant. He did not look at me. He did not mention the 25 families. 8 years. Federal minimum security. The judge called it lenient, given the scope. I walked out of the courthouse into an October wind that carried the smell of Lake Michigan and wet pavement. Sarah, Marcus's paralegal, met me on the steps with a folder. Inside was the financial summary. After liquidating Brendan's domestic accounts, seizing Victor Hale's recovered assets, and selling the firm's remaining property, the total recovery came to $2.4 million. The total theft had been $4.2 million. The shortfall was $1.8 million. 18 families who would receive partial restitution. 7 who would receive nothing unless additional funds materialized. There's a clause, Marcus told me that evening in his office. Because Brendan used the Callahan name as a primary asset and forged your backing on the original contracts, the victim's attorneys can technically place a lien on any property held in the Callahan name. Your house qualifies. I looked at him. He looked at the floor. They haven't filed yet, he added. They're giving you the choice. Voluntary sale, full proceeds to the restitution fund, or a legal battle that could take years and cost everyone more than the house is worth. The decision arrived, not in a flash of revelation, but in the quiet mechanical rhythm of the kitchen clock that night. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound a family without their savings. Each sound a veteran counting pills because he couldn't afford the prescription that kept him standing. Each sound a grandmother choosing between heat and food in a Chicago winter because a man with my last name had promised her safety and delivered ruin. I walked through the house one final time. 40 years of mornings and evenings and arguments and reconciliations held in these walls. I traced my fingers along the kitchen door frame where I had measured Brendan's height every birthday until he turned 18. Further down, in purple marker, Sophia's measurements from ages 3 through 9. I stood in the bedroom and breathed the last ghost of Rosemary's lavender, fading now beneath the scent of a house preparing to belong to someone else. The pen felt heavier than anything I had ever held. Heavier than the shoebox. Heavier than the hard drive. Heavier than the truth. I signed the listing agreement at Marcus's desk on a Tuesday morning and felt something I didn't expect. Not loss. Relief. The house had become a mausoleum for a family that no longer existed. Selling it was not a sacrifice. It was a release. The Boston real estate market, I thought, remembering the story of another family's betrayal. No. The Evanston market. My bricks, my mortar, converted at last into something clean. The movers came on a gray November morning. I watched them carry boxes into the truck with the detached curiosity of a man observing his own life being packed into cardboard. The last item I carried myself was the 1998 state championship trophy. I wrapped it in a blanket Rosemary had crocheted and set it carefully in the passenger seat of the Subaru. The new apartment was 6 blocks from the school. A studio on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone, with one window facing east and enough space for a desk, a bed, and the ghosts I chose to keep. I carried the trophy inside first, set it on the built-in shelf by the window, and began to unwrap it. That's when I saw it. Taped to the back of the trophy base, in a spot I had never thought to check because I had already found the letter hidden inside, was a small envelope. Violet paper. Rosemary's handwriting on the front, steady and elegant even in what must have been her final weeks. For Frank. When you are in a smaller world, she knew. She had known I would sell the house. She had known I would keep the trophy. She had hidden this final message in the one object she was certain would follow me into whatever life came after the explosion. I held the violet envelope in both hands, feeling its weight, and sat on the edge of my new bed in my new life, preparing to hear my wife's voice one last time. The envelope was the color of late April crocuses, a shade Rosemary had always called almost purple but too shy to commit. I found it taped to the back of the 1998 trophy, behind the brass plate that read Evanston Township State Champions coach Frank Callahan. The adhesive had yellowed with age, but the seal was intact. She had placed it there years ago, long before she got sick, long before she knew about Brendan's empire of paper and stolen trust. I sat on the floor of my studio apartment, 600 square feet on Dempster Street, 6 blocks from the school where I'd spent 38 years turning boys into men who shook hands firmly and looked people in the eye. The floor was cold. February had no mercy for old knees on hardwood. I opened it. Frank, if you're reading this in a smaller world, it means the big one finally let you down. I'm sorry. I know you fought for it, for the house, for the name, for the family we built on that corner of Maple Avenue. But some houses are just wood and memory. And memory travels light. I want you to know something I never said out loud. I was proud of you every single morning. Not because of the trophies, because you got up, because you made coffee for both of us even when I pretended to still be asleep, because you never stopped believing people could be better than they were yesterday. Brendan broke that belief. I know. I watched it happen slowly at first, then all at once, like a levee giving way. But here's what I need you to hear, Frank. He didn't break you. You're still the man who makes coffee for 2. There's one more thing. A favor. Not for me, for Sophia. In the storage unit on Clark Street, behind the filing cabinet, there's a brown accordion folder. Inside, you'll find a trust document. I set it up through a lawyer in Evanston, Patricia Dominguez, on Chicago Avenue. The trust holds $340,000. It's clean money, Frank. Every dollar came from my teaching pension, my mother's inheritance, and the sale of the lake cabin in 2019. Brendan never knew about any of it. The trust is for Sophia's education. It's structured so that neither Brendan nor Meredith can access it, only you, as trustee, until Sophia turns 25. Patricia has the originals. She's expecting your call. One more thing. Tell Sophia her grandmother loved her more than grammar, more than crossword puzzles, more than the roses in the backyard. Tell her that love doesn't expire. It just changes shape. Make coffee for 2, Frank. Even if the second cup just sits there getting cold. All my love. Always. Rosemary. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. The words didn't change. But I did. Each pass stripped something away. Some barnacled layer of grief and anger that had calcified over the weeks since the gymnasium. By the 5th reading, I was just a man on a cold floor, holding a letter from his wife, crying without sound the way men my age have learned to cry. Shoulders locked, jaw tight, everything escaping through the eyes alone. $340,000. Clean. Protected. Untouched by Brendan's machinery. Rosemary had been building a lifeboat while I was still convinced the ship was unsinkable. I called Patricia Dominguez the next morning. She answered on the 2nd ring, as though she'd been waiting, and perhaps she had. Mr. Callahan, she said, her voice warm and professional in equal measure. Rosemary told me you'd call eventually. I just didn't know when. We met that afternoon. The documents were immaculate, structured as an irrevocable educational trust with a spendthrift clause that made it legally invisible to creditors, courts, or any claim Brendan might file from his cell at FCI Pekin. Patricia explained it twice. I nodded both times but understood it fully only once. Sophia's future was safe. Rosemary had made sure of that before her body failed, before the shoebox, before the hard drive, before any of it. That evening, I made 2 cups of coffee. I set the second one on the windowsill, where the light came in gold and thin through February clouds. It sat there until it went cold, and I didn't pour it out. I let it stay. Sophia visited on a Saturday. Meredith dropped her off without coming inside, her Honda idling at the curb like a held breath. Sophia was taller than I remembered. 9 years old and already carrying herself with that particular gravity children develop when they've watched adults fall apart around them. Grandpa, she said, standing in the doorway with her backpack hanging off one shoulder. Is this where you live now? This is where I live now. She looked around at the single bookshelf, the folding table, the trophy on the windowsill beside a cold cup of coffee. It's small. It is. Do you like it? I thought about the question the way I used to think about a play in the final 30 seconds, not what was easy, but what was true. I'm learning to. She sat on the floor next to me. She pulled a composition notebook from her backpack and opened it to a page covered in purple ink, her grandmother's favorite color. "I'm writing a story for school," she said. "About a coach who solves a mystery. Can you help me?" I looked at her, at Rosemary's eyes in a 9-year-old's face, at the way she held her pen like a sword she hadn't yet learned to swing. "Yeah, sweetheart. I can help you with that." Outside, Chicago softened. Snow turned to rain. February was ending, and something that wasn't quite spring pressed against the windows, like a promise, still deciding whether to keep itself. I made 2 cups of coffee the next morning, and the morning after that, and every morning since. Some rituals aren't about the past. They're about refusing to let love become past tense. The idea came to me on a Thursday in March, 3 weeks after Sophia's visit, while I was grading papers at the folding table that served as my desk, my dining room, and my war room all at once. A student 17, varsity point guard, name of Deshaun Ellis, had written an essay about his grandmother losing her house to a reverse mortgage scheme she never understood. He wrote it in the clumsy, furious prose of a boy who wanted to hit something but only had words. The final line read, "Nobody told her she had the right to say no." I put the essay down. I stared at the cold cup of coffee on the windowsill, and I heard Rosemary's voice, not a memory, not a ghost, just the echo of 37 years of sleeping beside someone who always knew what to do next. "Build something, Frank. That's what coaches do." I called Marcus the next morning. "I want to start a program," I said. "Legal aid. Financial literacy. Specifically for seniors who don't know they're being targeted until it's too late." Marcus was quiet for 4 seconds, I counted. Then, "Where?" "The school. After hours. The gym's empty Tuesday and Thursday evenings." "You want to run a legal clinic out of a high school gymnasium?" "I want to run it out of the place where people already trust me." He laughed short, surprised, genuine. Rosemary would have loved this. Rosemary would have already had the flyers printed. We launched 6 weeks later. Patricia Dominguez volunteered as lead counsel for estate planning and trust documentation. Marcus handled criminal referrals and connected attendees with pro bono attorneys across Cook County. Diane Cho wrote a piece for the Tribune. Not the exposé this time, but something quieter. A profile. She called it "The Coach Who Came Back." I told her the title was too dramatic. She told me to stop coaching her headlines. J.T. Thompson showed up on the first night. He didn't need legal help. His case was settled, his partial restitution secured. He came because he said he owed me. I told him he didn't owe me a thing. He said, "Then I'm here because I want to be." That good enough, coach? It was. We called it Rosemary's Court. Not because of the legal meaning, though Marcus appreciated the double meaning with his particular brand of dry humor, but because Rosemary had always loved the backyard rose garden, and because she had once told me that a court is just a place where people come to be heard, a basketball court. A court of law. A courtyard where roses grew despite Chicago winters. It was all the same thing. A space where someone could stand up and say, "This happened to me," and be believed. By June, we'd served 43 families, exposed 2 ongoing scams, one a home repair fraud targeting widows in Rogers Park, the other a fake Medicare supplement plan that had already taken $89,000 from 11 people. Marcus filed the reports. Diane published the findings. The cycle spun forward, and this time it spun toward daylight instead of darkness. Sophia came every other Saturday. Meredith would idle at the curb, never coming in, never staying longer than the 10 seconds it took for Sophia to unbuckle her seatbelt and run to my door. I didn't push. Meredith had her own grief to carry. Her own reckoning with the man she'd married, and the life she'd built on a foundation she hadn't known was hollow. One Saturday in late May, Sophia brought her composition notebook again. She'd finished the story, the one about a coach who solves a mystery. 12 pages in purple ink. She handed it to me with the solemnity of a closing argument. "I got an A," she said. "Of course you did. My teacher said the ending was sad but hopeful." She said that's the hardest kind to write. I looked at the last page. Sophia had written, "The coach didn't win the game. but he saved the team. And sometimes, that's the same thing. I closed the notebook. I pulled her into a hug that probably lasted too long for a 9-year-old's patience. But she didn't pull away. "Grandpa." "Yeah, sweetheart. Are you still sad?" The honest answer was yes. The honest answer was also no. The honest answer was that grief doesn't end, it just learns to share the room with other things. Purpose. Routine. The smell of coffee in a small kitchen. The sound of a child's voice asking questions that matter. "I'm getting better," I said. "Every day. A little better." She nodded, satisfied the way children are when they decide an adult is telling the truth. That evening, after she left, I sat on the floor of my apartment with the trophy on one side and the cold cup of coffee on the other. I thought about Rosemary, about her hands in the garden, her voice on that recording, her handwriting in violet ink. I thought about Brendan, about the boy who used to sit in the front row of my practices, who used to clap when his old man drew up a winning play. I thought about what breaks inside a person to make them capable of what he did, and whether I could have caught it sooner, and whether that question would ever stop visiting me at night. It wouldn't. I knew that. Some questions are tenants, not guests. But here's what I also knew, what Rosemary had been trying to tell me from beyond the grave. Through shoeboxes and hard drives and letters taped to trophies. Trust is not a weakness. Silence is. I stood up. I washed both cups. I set them on the drying rack side by side. One for the morning that was coming. One for the person who would always be with me in the ways that mattered. Then I turned off the light and let the city breathe outside my window. And I slept the way a man sleeps when he has finally stopped running from the truth. If you or someone you love is a victim of elder financial abuse, contact the National Elder Fraud Hotline at 1-833-FRAUD11. 1-833-372-8311. You are not alone. Silence protects the wrong people. Thank you for listening.